The internet is littered with garage storage tips, but a lot of them are either annoyingly generic one-size-fits-all options or over-engineered and expensive. Well, today I'm working on a quick weekend project that's going to turn this wall of my garage into 19 feet of storage space that works for my needs. I'm going to do it with a couple very basic building concepts that make this completely scalable and customizable, and I'm going to do it all using portable job site tools and basic construction materials from the big box store. And of course, I ran into some challenges as well. So this is the newest addition to my garage, 19 feet of floor-to-ceiling storage. And the real beauty of this system is how simple and flexible it is because of the unique way that this whole thing goes together. Okay, so here's what we're working with today. This entire storage system is built with 2x4s, plywood, and construction screws. To get started, I need to make a platform to serve as the base, and this is going to give me a nice solid level foundation that everything's going to be built off of. And this is very simple. I'm just going to cut up some 2x4s and make a frame that's approximately 9 feet long and a little over 2 feet deep. I'm using 2.5-inch construction screws to assemble this, and I'm using these screws almost exclusively to build this whole structure. I did use a handful of 3.5-inch screws for one part of this, which you'll see in a minute. I'm also adding center supports to this frame, and a good rule of thumb is to add these every 24 to 30 inches. And once I had the frame assembled, I'm just going to use a laser level to set the height of the platform and make it nice and well level. So I'm fastening this base to the wall using the studs, and I'm just going into each stud with 3.5-inch screws. On this end, I'm starting out using 2 composite shims put together, which is about 3/8 of an inch. And then I'm going to use my ruler to make sure that I stay perfectly level with my level line as I work my way down, and adjust my shims as I need to make sure that I maintain that levelness. Besides getting everything level, the shims also help me keep the platform off the ground. These 2x4s are not pressure treated, and since this is a garage, there is always a chance of water intrusion, and so this is going to give that water a small gap to safely pass underneath the base without damaging the wood. Nice. So I'm just going along this front edge now, making sure everything is level from front to back. And I think there's a little bit of twist in this board because that far end is higher than it needs to be. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and fasten my plywood down and then add some weight to that end to weigh it down so that I can get it shimmed nice and level, and then I'll move on to the next step. To do that, I'm just going to use my track saw to cut a couple of strips 30 inches wide. And don't get discouraged if you don't have a track saw. A circular saw with a straight edge can do this too, but don't skip the straight edge. You really want to keep these cuts straight and square because it's going to make this whole build go so much smoother if you do. And if you're wondering, I chose 30 inches because that's the distance from the wall to the garage door rails, and I wanted to be able to maximize the use of all this space for storage. And one nice feature is that the plywood overhangs the edge of the frame to create a toe kick, and that's an optional thing, but I think it adds a nice touch and it keeps your feet from bumping into the base when you're handling something large, and it also allowed me to use less material when making that frame underneath. All right, so the good news is just the weight of the plywood was enough to bring that end down, and I just had to shim it back up just a tiny bit, and we're good to go. Time to move on. All right, so with a nice level base put down, I'm going to start working on the first key element that makes this system so flexible, and that's the partitions that are going to make up the structure. Building these partitions is so simple. I just took 2 2x4s and connected them together with 2 strips of 3/4-inch plywood. I used my little job site saw to cut these strips of plywood into 1.5-inch wide strips to match the 2x4s. You could also do this by cutting your plywood into long strips with a track saw or a circular saw and then chopping them up with the miter saw, but I'm going to be using this saw for something else later, and I already had it sitting here, so that's what I used. These partitions are going to run the entire length from the base all the way to the ceiling, so to figure out exactly how long to cut each 2x4, I took 2 strips of my plywood and stacked them on the base. Then I used my laser distance finder to measure the distance from here to the ceiling. And up above me on the ceiling, I've installed a strip of plywood the length of the base, and this not only gives me a place that I can attach my partitions to, but it also allows me to mark my layout line so each new partition I add is perfectly spaced. And I know what you must be thinking, what about that garage door rail isn't in the way? Yes, it is for now, but I'm actually going to have that rail moved up to the height of the ceiling to get it out of the way. I just haven't had that work done yet, so right now I'm going to work around it. Oh, and I also used a countersink bit to make sure that my screw heads were sitting below the surface of the plywood so that it didn't throw off my distance measurements, and it also keeps these thin strips from splitting in half. And the result is that I can stand my partition up in place and it's a nice snug fit, which gives me the freedom to kind of nudge it around exactly into place, making sure that it's flush with the edge of the base and perfectly plumb. Then I can just screw it into the ceiling and into the base, and that thing's not going anywhere. Now I just have to repeat that process with all the remaining partitions. So the idea for this storage system is not my own, at least not entirely. After watching a video by Paul over on the Stud Pack YouTube channel where he showed a couple of these awesome building techniques, my eyes were really open to how I could make a highly customizable storage system almost like adult Legos. One of those techniques was the use of these partitions, which is kind of like the skeleton this whole system is built on. Because it's really easy to vary the height as well as the distance between the partitions, I was able to use this as a starting point for designing my own storage that's optimized for my space and takes care of my specific storage needs. And if I ever want to change this up, all I have to do is unscrew those 4 screws that are holding the partition in place and move them where I want them to be. As each one of these partitions goes up, I'm looking for my reference lines, and that's just to make sure that I'm perfectly plumb and also parallel to the previous partition. And I'm also rechecking the distance from the base to the ceiling for each new partition to account for any variation in the height. And I found that the variation wasn't much more than 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch, but it does make for a lot cleaner work, and it also ensures I don't have to use shims to make up any gaps or differences in the length. So with all my partitions up on the platform, it's time to move on to adding my first type of storage. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do inside these partitions is create some tote storage, and to do that, I took some 2x4 pieces and I ripped them in half at the table saw. You don't have to do that. You could leave these whole and it'll be just fine, but since I have the ability to do that, it's kind of silly not to, because I can get twice as many pieces out of the material that I have. Ripping these 2x4s in half is definitely the best option and super easy, but if you're going to do it, don't be like me and commit the cardinal sin of DIY woodworking. Oh, you gotta be kidding me. It's amazing once you build your own fancy workshop, how soon you forget that you can't plug a table saw and a shop vac into the same circuit. And that's why you put at least a 20 amp circuit in your workshop. And to install them, I have 2 sets of spacers. One pair is 12 3/4 of an inch, and that's for the bottom row of totes, and one pair that's 14 inches high, and that's gonna be for all the other ones all the way to the top. And once you really get rolling, the rest of this is child's play. And with all the tote storage up, now I want to focus on adding some shelf storage because, well, totes just aren't good at storing everything. And to start, I have this area between the partitions and the wall to span, and that's going to be a perfect place to add some larger shelves. These shelves can't be the full 30 inches deep though, because I have to allow room for the garage opener, and so I'm only going to go 24 inches deep here. But because of the design of these shelves, attaching a 24-inch shelf to a 30-inch partition is actually no problem at all. I'm attaching the front, back, and center supports to the plywood sheet, but not the side supports. Then I can add the longer 30-inch side support to the partition, and if you have a stud wall on the other side, you just fasten the short support there, but I have a cinder block wall to deal with. So I had to pre-drill some holes, and I used my Pika pencil to mark the location of these holes on the wall, and I used a special white lead in the pencil because it's easier to see. Then I used a hammer drill to make pilot holes and Tapcon screws to fasten the supports to the wall. And now my shelf just drops right onto the supports. And all I have to do is fasten the shelf to the supports from above using 4 screws. This creates a very sturdy shelf that's easy to install because you don't have to hold up the entire weight of the shelf in place while you're fastening it to the structure. And then came the second shelf, and this one was a bit more of a game to install. The garage door rail and the opener, along with my need to use every inch of usable space with absolutely no margin for error, well, that provides me with an interesting challenge to say the least. But after using some caveman ingenuity, I was able to get it in position to drop it down into place. You know, just how I planned it. That was like Tetris. The rest of the shelves, though, were much easier to install. I did have to use a clamp as a spreader on the first shelf because the 2x4 partition did have a slight bow in it, but now that that shelf's in place, that's going to stay nice and straight. And I really like this way of building shelves because it's just much easier to change the configuration of the storage if you need to. If I want to say move a shelf up or down or add another shelf, I just need to remove 4 screws, pull the shelf off, and then focus on moving the side supports up or down. Then I could just slide my shelf back onto the supports. And all the other shelves didn't need that much persuasion to fit right into place. And this really highlights the flexibility of this system, this rail being a perfect example. Because I can't slide totes in and out because of the interference, I was able to convert that pretty easily to shelf space and make the best use of that area until I get the garage door rail raised. All right, I want to do something with this space to organize our bikes. Bikes are just one of those things that is a huge pain to keep out of the way, but of all the solutions that I've seen on YouTube, hanging them vertically seems to be the best for my situation. This way each bike is accessible and there's no chance of a pileup on the floor. So to create this, I'm just using a very old trick that's been all over YouTube forever, and that's to use these bike hooks that I put into a piece of 2x4 that will fasten to the wall. The 2x4 needs to be fastened to the studs in the wall so that it can support all the weight, and I'm just using 2 screws per stud, and now the hooks can be mounted anywhere along the 2x4. The only thing you want to make sure that you do is to space them out evenly to give each bike plenty of room to come on and off the hook. The hook holds on to the front tire and it just hangs in place like this. And I was kind of lucky because all 3 of these bikes are different sizes and wheelbases, and so they nest together pretty well and the handlebars don't get in the way of one another, so I was able to save a little bit of space. So is this an elegant solution? No. But is it a cheap and effective one? Absolutely, this is going to work just perfect for me. So I saved this last little bit of partition here because I thought it'd be kind of cool to create a little tool cubby for all my lawn tools that I use on a very regular basis and keep them separate from the other tools which I rarely use at all. So to start, I'm going to line the inside of this partition with plywood, and that's just going to give me a solid surface to mount my tools on. And I didn't have quite enough large pieces of plywood to cover the entire area, but I was able to find a couple of smaller strips to fill in the gaps. This solution is also going to give me the chance to reuse the fast track that I had hanging up on the wall here, but instead of going horizontally and taking up all that wall space, I can now put it on the inside of this and double it up. I really do like this solution because not only do I get to reuse my fast tracks and all of these hooks, but it's a much more effective use of the space. And this just really demonstrates that this partition system really opens up a lot of possible ways to store things, and I still have room in here to add more fast tracks in the future. Well, I definitely think there's a chance to optimize this, but this is definitely a good start. But this area is throwing me a new challenge to deal with because up above me, there's a lot of plumbing running through here. So to start, I built an independent base, and I made this just like the other one, but this one's only 2 feet wide. I made 2 more of those partitions, and these partitions are not going to go all the way up because of that previously mentioned plumbing. And then I got busy making shelves, lots of shelves. And when I went back to using my table saw to trim these shelves to final size, I ran into my old nemesis again. Ah, come on. So I guess even after moving the shop back, I still can't keep this thing from tripping the breaker. So I abandoned the table saw and just finished up the shelves using my track saw. So this area of storage is going to be more for things that I use on a regular basis that I want quick access to, which is why I'm putting it closer to the door. I ended up making 3 small shelves to go inside the tower, and I'm just using more of those 2x4 spacers to position the shelf supports. Then I can connect the shelf tower to the tote storage with a 3-foot shelf that I plan on using kind of like a small workbench. And all the way at the top, I'm going to add 1 more large shelf to kind of tie everything together even further. I don't think that's what they mean when they tell you to solve a problem by using your head. But once I got it up there, I fastened it into place, and because these partitions are not fastened to the ceiling like the others, I decided to secure everything to the studs in the wall, at the top and down here near the base. I went ahead and added 1 more shelf above the workbench just to give me a place to store larger bulk items, and this open space below was perfectly designed to tuck my tool chest into nice and tidy. All right, guys, that's it for this one. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I also hope that you learned something new. And if you'd like to see some other videos related to storage and organization, I'll have those lined up for you right here. And until next time, have fun in the shop or the garage.